You are good to go, Chair.
I would like to call the Committee of the Whole of April 6th, 2020 to order. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tony Bernet, Councillor and Chair of the Planning and Economic Development Committee. We are meeting electronically through Zoom in accordance with Section 238 of the Municipal Act, which provides for electronic participation and the town's procedural bylaw. Members of the public may observe the proceedings by assessing the live webcast at our YouTube channel. I will now ask our Deputy Clerk to complete a roll call of council so that we can confirm quorum.
Thank you, Chair. Mayor Easton,
Present.
Councillor Dima,
I'm here, thank you.
Councillor Russell.
Here.
Councillor Bernet,
Here.
Councillor Pat Jariva,
Present.
Councillor McPherson,
Here.
Councillor and Deputy Mayor Micklick,
Here.
Councillor Timmers,
Here.
Councillor Reimer.
Here.
Thank you. We have quorum, Chair.
In addition, I want to take a moment to welcome the staff we have joining us today electronically. Chief Administrative Officer Mike Kirkopoulos, Director of Finance, Administration and Innovation Lawrence Wagner, Director of Planning and Development Matt Bruder, Manager of Municipal Law Enforcement Mike Barkway, Senior Planner Josh Workington, Manager of Prudence and Special Projects Melissa Shee, Director of Economic Development and Communications Paul Deaney, Manager of Corporate Communications Liliana Busnello, Director of Public Works Dave Graham, Director of Community Services Shannon McKay, Associate Director of Public Works Jillian Harris, Fire Chief Greg Hudson, Director of Legislative Services Town Clerk Julie Kirkolos, and moderating and clerking the meeting today, we have our Manager of Legislative Services Deputy Clerk Devan Kripp. IT staff are also in attendance. And also in attendance today, we have a full list: Sarah Knoll, GSP Group; Jeff Pakin, New Horizon Development Group; Joe Giacomo Donato, New Horizon Development Group; Nicole Simidor, New Horizon Development Group; Natasha Pakin, New Horizon Development Group; Barry Graziani, GNC Architects, Inc.; Rob Lincoln, GNC Architects, Inc.; Steve Pankratz, Landhack Consultants, Inc.; Kathy Zhu, White House Urban Design; Adam Makaretz, PTSL; Michael McRonald, Chair of Active Transportation Advisory Committee; Charlotte Sheridan, Chair of the Age Friendly Advisory Committee; and Pauline Creighton, Vice Chair of the Museum Advisory Committee. As this is a virtual meeting, I will ask that we follow some procedures during this electronic meeting. Should there be a connection or a service disruption of the chair, or if quorum is lost, the chair and/or deputy clerk will call a 10-minute recess to reconnect and to regain quorum. If quorum is lost, the meeting will be adjourned. If connection is lost from the chair, the deputy clerk, Councillor Michalak, will ask those, or sorry, the deputy clerk will ask those in attendance to wait up for 10 minutes to provide the chair time to reconnect and resume the meeting. Otherwise, after that time frame, the vice chair, Councillor Michalak, will resume the meeting until the chair has reconnected and resumes the roll. Each member of council who wishes to speak, please use the raise hand feature on your video call, and the deputy clerk will track our speakers list today, and then invite you to speak when I open it up for questions or comments. Also, when I finish reading a motion and announcing the mover, the deputy clerk will then call out the vote by reading each member of council's name out loud. Please remember to take yourself off mute during this portion of the meeting so that you can confirm if you support or oppose. Also, when not speaking, please remember to put yourselves on mute. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest this evening? Seeing none, Deputy Clerk. Do any members have any amendments to the order of the agenda? Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Bernier.
I had requested that the General Business and Finance Committee agenda be moved up directly after the Planning and Economic Development Committee. I believe it's noted here in the script. I'm not sure. I just wanted to confirm. Perhaps with through to the clerk.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Timmers. We have moved general business finance up after the planning and economic agenda. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other comments, we are now at the point of the agenda for statutory public meetings. We have one statutory public meeting this evening. The purpose of the public meeting is to receive comments from the public and consider questions regarding a zoning bylaw amendment by GSP Group for 5103 Green Lane Road. We will consider the staff report associated with each item immediately after each statutory public meeting. Section 1715 and 3412 of the Planning Act requires that before adopting an official plan amendment and before passing a zoning bylaw amendment, council must ensure that sufficient time and material is available to understand generally the proposal being considered, and council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of giving the public an opportunity to make representations regarding the proposed amendment. If a person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the town of Lincoln before the zoning amendment is approved or a decision is made on the draft plan of subdivision, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of town council to the Ontario Land Tribunal, OLT. Personal information is collected under the authority of the Planning Act and may be contained in an appendix to a staff report, published in the meeting agenda, delegation list, and or the minutes of the public meeting, and made part of the public record. The town of Lincoln collects this information in order to make informed decisions on the relevant issues and to notify interested parties of council's decisions. It may be used to serve notice of an Ontario Land Tribunal hearing. Names and addresses contained in submitted correspondence and other information will be available to the public unless the individual expressly requests the town to remove their personal information. The disclosure of this information is governed by the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. So our public meeting is for the purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment by GSP Group for 5103 Green Lane Road, PD 19-22. We are now on the delegations portion of the statutory public meeting, and we have one individual that has requested to be included in this public hearing. Once we have received the delegation committee, we'll transition directly into the report and the motion. Our delegation for this evening, for this item, is Sarah Knoll, Senior Planner from GSP Group. Prior to proceeding with the delegation, I will ask that council proceed with a majority vote to extend the speaking time. I have a motion moved by Councillor Pachariva that council extends the presentation until completed. And I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Micklick,
Yes.
Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
Mayor Easton,
Support.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yeah.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. That carries.
Thank you, Javan. I will now ask our Director of Planning and Development to provide introductory comments. Mr. Bruder?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My pleasure to be introducing this particular application brought forward by New Horizon Developments. This is for a zoning bylaw amendment for a 10-story building on Green Lane at 5103 Green Lane. And really what this is The 10-story height is in line with the GO Transit secondary plan study. However, our zoning bylaw has not yet been brought up to speed, so we have to make sure we reconcile that from a process standpoint, which is one of the reasons why we're here today. There is also the density of the site, which is also a little bit of a unique consideration because the way density is calculated leans itself to the developable area being the main part in which the density is calculated from. But here we have a property where part of it is within the urban area, part of it is not within the urban area. So when you really look at this thing from a property perspective, the density would be well within the range of what was envisioned in the GO Transit secondary plan. But because of that particular implication from a policy and interpretation point of view, the density is also the subject of the discussion today. So those are really the main points that I wanted to raise. And thanks very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Matt. I will now ask Sarah Knoll to proceed with the delegation. Sarah?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Clerk, if you can pull up, thank you very much. I'm going to just get my screens ready here. Okay, perfect. So good evening, Mr. Chair, members of committee, and members of the public that are in attendance. Thank you for allowing us to present the proposal for 5103 Green Lane Road, the lands owned by New Horizon Development Group. We do have 4 speakers tonight and to speak to 19 slides, which is an important repeat from the 2 neighborhood meetings that were previously held. So my name is Sarah Knoll, and I am a registered professional planner with GSP Group. And here with me tonight, as Mr. Chairman mentioned, are members of New Horizon Development Group, Jeff Paikin, President and Co-founder, Joe Giacomo Donato, Vice President and Co-founder, Natasha Paikin, Director of Client Experience. And then I'm also here with members of our consultant group. From GNC Architects, we have Barry Graziani and Rob Lincoln, the architectural firm. From Landhat Consultants, Inc., we have Steve Pongratz, the civil engineering firm. From Paradigm Transportation Solutions, we have Adam Makarowitz, the transportation consultant. And from White House Urban Design, we have Kathy Zhu for landscape and urban design. So for the next 2 slides, I am going to pass it over to Natasha, who will present.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to everyone in attendance for taking the time to join us this evening. New Horizon Development Group has built over 30 communities throughout the greater Hamilton area in its near 30-year history. Our team builds an array of built form, including custom homes, townhouses, mid-rise and high-rise condos and rentals. Each community is distinct. We are currently building Utopia condos next door to 5103 Green Lane. And since inception, New Horizon has raised or donated over $4.1 million to the greater Hamilton area communities. And next slide would be great. Thank you. Our team at New Horizon is constantly looking for ways to innovate and further enrich the communities where we develop. We are the proud recipient of the Canadian Home Builders Association's first ever Builder of Canada's Green Home of the Year. 90% of our nearly 1,500 units under construction right now are being built using geothermal energy, and the next generation of New Horizon developments, which actually started with Utopia, will target gold level LEED certification. We will touch upon further sustainability goals for this site later in the presentation.
Thanks, Natasha. So slide 4, to begin my slides, I'd like to quickly walk you through the timeline to be transparent on where we started, where we are, and what's to come. So we began with a pre-consultation submission in April of last year with the meeting held in May. We completed all the supporting studies and plans, and in October of 2021, we submitted the zoning bylaw amendment application. Circulation comments were received from the town, the region, and commenting agencies, and meetings with the town occurred in January and February of this year. We revised the plan and responded to comments at the end of February. The response brought about a redesign that reduced the number of amendments to the zone by decreasing the number of units and increasing unit sizes. We increased parking spaces while decreasing surface parking and increased the size of the orchard area. We also received our first clearance, which was from CN Rail. Hosted by the town, we held 2 neighborhood open houses and received clearance from the NPCA through receiving the second round of comments. We are now at the statutory public meeting, followed by a future recommendation meeting and the council. So slide 5 shows that the site is currently vacant, previously containing a one-story dwelling and accessory buildings. The lands were used for vehicle storage and residential, and also included a crop of grapevines located on the eastern urban lands. The site is located at the northern limit of a residential area in Beamsville and is proximal to public facilities, commercial areas, parks, and citywide amenities, together with local amenities. Slide 6 outlines the unique adjacent land uses that, because we are proposing to develop these lands, need to be studied and buffered from where required. The site is bound by the Canadian National Railway to the north and northeast. This feature required a detailed safety wall design submission to be prepared, and also a noise and vibration study. Conkle Creek is located to the west. This feature required an environmental impact assessment, floodplain analysis, and geotechnical investigation. To the east is Utopia, the mixed-use development under construction by New Horizon, and Green Lane Road abuts the site to the south, with a recently constructed multi-use trail. These features contributed to the requirements of the Urban Design Brief, Pedestrian Wind Assessment, Sun Shadow Study, and Traffic Impact Study. The proposal also required a planning justification report, environmental site assessment, archaeological assessment, and civil engineering reports. Another unique feature is the north-south line that divides the site vertically. This is an invisible line that zigzags just north of the site and then travels perpendicular down south to Green Lane Road. This is the dividing line between lands within the Greenbelt and outside of the Greenbelt, the rural and the urban lands. This feature required a peer review to the Sun Shadow Study and an orchard planting recommendation report. These studies, all prepared by professional consultants, have been submitted and reviewed by the town, region, CN, and Conservation Authority. So slide 7, why were those studies required and what is being proposed? The proposal is for one mixed-use building consisting of 347 units, 302.4 square meters of commercial space, and 392 parking spaces, the majority of which are located underground in 2 levels of underground parking. I've illustrated the heights on this elevation plan from GNC Architects, showing the west elevation. A 10-story stepped building design is proposed, focusing the height to the middle of the building, stepping down to 6, then 1 story along Green Lane Road. And it's important to note that a portion of the side elevation is blocked from view by the Utopia building, which is ghosted into that perspective rendering in that bottom right corner. You can see the Utopia building behind that black car. So slide 8 shows a rendering of the building and helps to depict the staggered heights I spoke to in the previous slide. Green Lane Road is the bottom right corner with the frontage illustrated with a commercial storefront. 1 story, but reads as 2 stories to promote the commercial component. The building rises to a mid-rise form at 6 stories, identical to the height of Utopia shown in the rear. Then the building increases to 10 stories and steps down to the north at 9 stories. I will note that in the information report prepared by staff that is in front of you tonight, there was a request to provide an angular plane drawing. This plan was provided to planning staff following reading that request, and the plan does indicate compliance to the angular plane along Green Lane Road. Amenity for the residents is provided on the site behind the rear 9-story portion of the building, over the parking garage, as well as inside the building and atop the 9th-story portion, again at the rear end of the site. Now, Kathy from White House Urban Design will speak to landscaping and amenity area designed for the residents in the next slide.
Thank you, Sarah. The design of the outdoor amenity space is focused on creating a variety of experiences for the residents who live on the site. There are large expanses of lawn, there's mounded topography, and it's extensively planted with trees and interspersed with hardscape plaza areas. And these elements combine to create a beautiful park-like setting. There's a meandering pathway that connects residents through the various amenity spaces to Green Lane Road and other offsite amenities. The pathway moves through a mix of hardscape and softscape spaces that can feel either open or intimate depending on where you are on the site. There are larger lawn and hardscape areas that can accommodate larger gatherings, as well as mounded vegetated spaces that create more intimate areas that are sunny or shaded to gather with your friends. There are pergolas and seating areas provided. There are benches, picnic tables, outdoor seating. There are private walkouts that have their own private backyard space and easy access to the larger amenity spaces. There's also seamless connection between the buildings and the outdoors. For example, the indoor and outdoor amenity areas. And in the south side, there's a designated pet area that's integrated with passive lawn spaces. The plant palette has been designed to provide shelter from the wind, and low impact development features such as permeable pavers are provided to help with groundwater recharge. And now I'll pass it off to Barry from GNC Architects to walk you through the internal building design.
Thank you, Kathy, and good evening, everyone. My name is Barry Graziani. I'm a principal at the GC Architects, and I'll just take you through the next 4 slides to help you better understand how we've organized this development on this site. So here we're starting with the underground, of which we have 2 levels, a total of 390 spaces of resident and visitor parking in the 2 levels of underground, as well as 10 spaces for the commercial component of the development. If we go to the next slide, which shows the ground floor. So fronting onto Green Lane, we have the purple area, which is the commercial component of the development. And then directly in behind that, we've located the loading and the ramp access into the underground. The parking spaces that you see along the driveway, the entry driveway, are visitor spaces for the orchard. And then beyond that, we have the turnaround and drop-off area for the residential component of the development. And you can see in the pink area where the lobby is located. And then internally, the yellow spaces would be the internal amenity space that is directly connected to the outside amenity space and landscaped area that Kathy just went through. The blue units that you see all around the remaining perimeter of the ground floor are the grade related units that would also have access to the exterior. If we go to the next slide, it shows one of our more typical floors, which is the 3rd to 6th floor. So we have a total of 347 residential units in this development. We have 80 units that are studios, or 23% of the total. 191 1-bedroom plus den units, which would equate to 55% of the total. 69 2-bedroom units, which would be 20% of the total, and 7 2-bedroom plus den units, which would be the final 2% of the total units. And our next slide shows the 10th floor. So on the southern half of the building, we have the residential units, which are shown in the blue, and then the internal amenity space shown in yellow, just off of the elevator access to this floor. And then the green area that's shown to the north would be an outdoor amenity space that would provide views of the lake and beyond. And with that, I'll pass it back to Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. So slide 14 of 20. The details that Kathy and Barry provided in the previous slide speak to the development that is to be provided on the eastern lands, the urban lands. The proposal conforms with policies within the Beamsville GO Transit Area Secondary Plan within the official plan. And because it conforms, an official plan amendment is not required. What is required is a zoning bylaw amendment to permit the 10-story maximum height to conform with the secondary plan heights, as Mr. Bruder mentioned, establish a minimum railway right-of-way setback to the exposed parking garage along the northern limits of 7.5 meters, and permit a minimum dwelling unit size of 46 square meters for 1 bedroom and 60 square meters for 2 or more bedroom units, a reduction in 9 and 5 square meters respectively. And the proposal is also asking to utilize the provision in the official plan that allows for the town to consider the requirement to provide community benefits in exchange for increased density. So slide 15, with regards to the density on the site, I wanted to run through the requirements of calculating residential density within the official plan. Net density is defined in the official plan and requires lands that cannot be developed to be excluded from the calculation. This site has a few land areas that need to be excluded from the area that calculates density. So to start, the entire site has an area of 2.348 hectares, that first row in the blue chart. If the density was calculated across the entirety of the site, the 347 units would represent 147.81 units per hectare. The town requires a land dedication along the entire frontage of Green Lane Road, that white rectangular area inside the site limits on this image. Removing this land dedication on the rural portion, the density becomes 148.22 units per hectare. Then residential density cannot be calculated using the rural lands. So if we remove the remaining 1.334 hectares of rural lands, the lands to the left of the vertical black dash line, it's a little off center here, but between the yellow and the brown, the density becomes 348 units per hectare. And on the urban lands, we also have to remove the lands within the floodplain, the green triangle in the upper right corner, and we also need to remove the required road widening. So removing all these lands brings us to a density of just under 353 units per hectare. And I walk you through this to give context to the density number and the uniqueness of the site and the request to provide community benefits. The lands within the proposal, excluding the road widening, have a density of 149 units per hectare, but a net density of 352.89 units per hectare. And it's this net density evaluation that requires the request for community benefits. So slide 16, what are the community benefits that are proposed by New Horizon? So to start off, an important contribution to community benefits is offered in the form of housing affordability. The development will include units in a mixed form of both affordable home ownership and rental units structured at 80% of market value over the duration of 10 years. In addition, approximately 0.85 hectares of land on the site will be devoted to what is called POPs, privately owned, in this case by the Future Condominium Corporation, public spaces. These spaces are to be used and enjoyed by the public. We think this is a great space for the public to enjoy, located at the terminus of the recently constructed multi-use path on the south side of Green Lane Road. And this is what was envisioned by the town in their secondary plan. We see possibly directional signage provided at the terminus of this walkway to invite people into the public space. I also understand the town is looking for feedback on a multi-use connection from the west of this site along Green Lane through the rural area. And this will all provide great community connection. The dedicated private-owned public space is divided into two uses. Construction, provision, and maintenance of a community orchard will
Well, Sarah, I think you're frozen.
The trees and shrubs and things to keep species together, and an irrigation system is designed into the orchard area. The operational side is to be determined as plantings and maintenance are still a ways out, but New Horizon and the Future Condo Corporation look forward to coordinating with a local farmer or vendor or community group. There are surface parking spaces devoted solely for the orchard use, accessed by a private drive aisle into the site. The other privately owned public space is the enhanced environmental area at the northern portion. Construction, provision, and maintenance of this area with pollinator gardens, pathways, and educational signage is planned to allow for the community to passively enjoy the lands. This area is designated to be self-sustaining. Another important part of this overall proposal is the sustainability and low impact development design that has been included, which are highlighted on the next slide. So slide 17, within all of New Horizons projects, they continue to target LEED certification, as Natasha mentioned, which is the goal here at 5103 Green Lane Road. The various sustainability initiatives which are proposed within this development are permeable pavers, which permit rainwater to filter through the surface and into the ground. Permeable pavers have many benefits, which include reducing the concentration of some pollutants, cooling down the temperature of urban runoff, and reduce the need to apply salt for de-icing in the wintertime. Next, a solar panel array will be installed on top of the 10-story roof. As well, geothermal energy will be provided through a geothermal heat exchange system, which creates recycling of energy to circulate warm or cool air throughout the building. There is support for active transportation through 144 accessible long-term bicycle storage spaces provided for residents, with 8 short-term bicycle parking spaces for visitors, which is supported by the recently confirmed need for the GO station to be built in close proximity to this proposal. And last but not least, bioswales will be designed, which are vegetated stormwater best management practices that temporarily store rainwater or snowmelt from the roof or pavement in planting beds or other structures. Some of the key benefits include reducing heat island effect, helping to reduce flooding, and provides aesthetic value as attractive landscape features. And for these last two slides, I wanted to highlight some concluding statements, and thank you for allowing us for this extended presentation. So, Madam Clerk, if you can just click to the last slide, slide 19, and I'll just read through these highlights out loud, which indicate that the proposed development will redevelop an underutilized site in Beamsville's Greenfield area, build out the vision set in the Beamsville GO Transit Station secondary plan, and supported by the initial business case confirming the feasibility of a future GO train station in Beamsville. Increase and diversify the existing housing stock, bringing more residents and vitality into Beamsville. Provide commercial space, which provides employment and encourages patrons. Encourage local economic activity through the addition of units, residents, and pedestrian activity. Incorporate numerous low-impact development and sustainability measures. And provide an agricultural use and farm diversified use with a community orchard, along with a passive environmental area, which will also provide a protective transition to Conkle Creek and the agricultural lands to the west. So thank you, Mr. Chair, members of committee, for your time. Look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you very much, Sarah and Barry and Kathy and all the speakers. Are there any clarifying questions to the delegate from committee? Councillor Rinjima, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Brunet. Thank you for the presentation. It's very interesting. There's a lot of interesting components to this development to look at. There's a lot of positives and some things that are a little different that I think that take a little bit of thought to understand. We've had POPs come forward in another development recently. But I have a couple of questions for you about that. Can you provide a little bit of detail about how the POP space to the west will be maintained? Will it be purely the condo corporation, yet it's a public space? And how does that work? Is it truly a public space? And if it is, who would hold the liability for what happens on there? And also, will there be an easement registered on title so that the public can use it? And also, will the developer be contributing maintenance funds to the condo corporation, or will it be totally borne by the condo corporation? And by the way, I think it's wonderful. To be clear, I'm looking to prevent problems for all three parties, the public / municipality, the condo corporation, and the developer. I want this to be successful. And I'd like to figure out what support might be required to make it a successful proposal. So I guess three questions in there.
Sarah, do you want me to take a run at these?
Sure.
That's great.
Thank
Do
you.
you want me to repeat the questions?
Why don't you go one at a time and I'll answer them one at a time for everybody's benefit.
Okay, who would hold the liability for what happened on the property?
So we've done this elsewhere. We've done this at our project known as Bridgewater on the waterfront in Burlington, where we have two condominium buildings that are separated by a public walkway with a public easement that is all paid for by the developer, all maintained by the condo corporation, and in this particular case, in conjunction with the attached hotel, but that's just another private owner owning space that's used by the public. And the insurance is part of the condominium corporation's insurance for liability. So that package of public space, yet privately owned, as the developer, we create and pay for the space and manage it until the turnover meeting. So for about a year, we are solely responsible for that. We're responsible to find the right person or people or organizations to maintain the space, whether it's a professional landscaper, a professional farmer, and then the managing corporation owned by the owners of the condominium building more comfortably known as the condominium corporation, take over those contracts and are either happy with them or not, or who does the maintaining going forward. So the liability issue is covered by the insurance of the condominium corporation. The maintenance is handled by the board of the condominium corporation through a professional maintainer of some description. And as Sarah pointed out, it could be a combination of farmers and landscapers working together, but we will be sure as the developer that the right people are in place before we turn it over to our owners, because we have an ongoing warranty obligation to them to ensure this stuff is done right. Hope that answered the question.
Yes, it did. Thank you. And the other question I have is, will there be an easement registered untitled so the public can use it? How does that work?
I'm not the lawyer for the town, but I will tell you the lawyer for the city of Burlington insisted on that, and there is one. So if the town requires it, it will be provided. It's probably in everyone's best interest to have one, because then it properly lays out the legal obligations, rights, and lack of rights for owners and public in that space. It is privately owned space and it will be owned by the condominium owners. But again, it's not at all unprecedented to have that shared with public use and public good.
I appreciate that. Mr. Chair, I know there was 2 questions in there, but I have a third question. Is that all right?
Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. I appreciate the amount of detail that's coming forward at this stage for consideration. Detail right down to the number of bicycle parking spots. But what comes next? Site plan? And will any of this change during the site plan process?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to the councillor. We expect to submit a site plan imminently, and we do not expect anything to change from this plan to the other that I'm aware of.
Okay,
I can add to that, Councillor, that if there are changes to what you've seen today, it won't be our doing. It will come from the town to us. We've had an incredibly thorough and exhaustive exchange that's been to everyone's benefit. And that's allowed this plan to get to where it is today, which is site plan ready. There is nothing that is a stone left unturned that has to be looked at in order to get this site plan application exactly as you see it. And that's our intention.
Okay, so I guess that was kind of my question. Is this your site plan and is it kind of ready to submit? And I think you've said yes.
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Chair, I have one more question. I know I had sort of 2 wrapped up in that POPs question. And
Councillor Rinjo, I'm going to move on to Councillor Timmers, but if your question isn't answered, I will come back to you after the first round.
Sure, thanks.
Councillor Timmers.
Thank you very much, Chair Bernay, through the delegation. Excellent presentation and report. I really appreciate the visuals here on, all of the building and the green space that you've provided. I had a lot of questions around the green space, and as someone who lived on a fruit farm, fruit trees are extremely labor intensive. It requires a lot of equipment. It requires a lot of work. I'm having a hard time understanding how this orchard will be maintained and by who and where the equipment will be. And I think I just maybe need to see some better examples. You did speak to it a little bit, but with your idea of perhaps bringing in a farmer or a professional who would maintain that space, and would that be paid for by the condo corporation?
So I can
Jeff, if I could jump in on that one there.
Sure.
Sure. We're going to start interviewing, and we have 2 years until the orchard's actually there, but we're starting to interview local farmers to help us plant and take care of all the fruit trees and all the peach trees and have it run properly. So it's new to us, and we're going to get a local farmer to take care of it, and it's going to be budgeted in the Condo Corp's budget for it.
So let me piggyback on that to say 2 additional things. The family that sold us the farm, we've become very good friends, and they were farmers themselves, and they are actually bringing us names of people they know locally who will be appropriate for this requirement. And on top of that, if it weren't a farm, it would be some other form of vegetation that would be requiring proper and ongoing maintenance that is paid for by a condominium owners, management board, etc. The good news about that is that because of the size of the building, it's not a big burden on any given homeowner, that there's enough units there to support a budget that's required to maintain something of this scale and scope. So there won't be a requirement to sort of overturn the pillows and look for loose change to pay the bills. There's enough condominium fees there from enough condominiums that it can support the budget required to do this thing properly.
Okay, well, that sounds good, and I like that answer. I certainly think you do need a farmer that knows what he's doing to grow a successful orchard. Community garden plots are extremely popular as well. Maybe perhaps part of, I don't know if you've thought about that, so that residents could have their own plot and grow vegetables. Is that something that could possibly be in the plan, or no?
It is something we've talked about, and it's certainly not something we're averse to, providing it can not limit the number of people that want to have use of the land in a place where there's 346 units and public access also. We have to balance between letting individuals do their own growing and have it be a publicly accessible space where you can help yourself to a peach. There's got to be a little bit of sort of proper management within those two potentially competing interests, but we'll certainly take back your suggestion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And Chair Brene, I believe I have one more question around the possible rental units. I didn't see in the report how many possible rental units. Is there a number or not?
I can answer that. I can answer that as well. I'm sorry. We had exhaustive discussions about this. We're going to wait until the time when the units are close to being finished to determine in which fashion the people who are working on behalf of the town and the region prefer this number of units to be coming forward. Our commitment is to permit 15 units to be in combination of assisted affordable home ownership and an 80% of average market rent in the marketplace rental. The affordable home ownership assistance is, they now own the condominium. It's an instantaneous sale, and it helps people who can afford the payment but not the down payment to own their own home. And the affordable market rent at 80% under the average market rent is a 10-year commitment to that program. There are other programs out there that are supported by the province with heavy dollars that go longer than 10 years. And if we can get those heavy dollars, we're happy to make it be longer than 10 years. But with our own dollars, we're happy to do it for a 10-year commitment to ensure that there is a healthy, affordable component. So at closer to move-in time, if the people who are in the know in the town and the region tell us what we want is all rented and all 15 units rented, that's what we'll do. And if they tell us we want a mix of owned and rented, that's what we'll do. We don't want to pigeonhole the answer until we get closer to identifying what the need is at the time, so it can have the greatest impact for the community benefit.
Okay, thank you. I guess I was hoping that number would be a lot higher than 15. We desperately need affordable rentals in our community.
Well, I can tell you the affordable rentals we built in Burlington and that we continue to own and manage now 8 years later into a 20-year commitment. The province gave a loan on those. It was a program that was available at that time, and they loaned to help them be constructed. $150,000 per unit. That's a forgivable loan after 20 years if we rent them the way they were intended to be rented. And with that assistance at the prices and costs of 7 years ago, that building basically breaks even at the 80% of affordable market rent with all this free money to help build it. So it's a very challenging financial model to have more of that come forward without assistance to construct the units, because as you know, prices are crazy and costs are crazy, and to bring them in at 80% under average market rent, not under market rent, is a significant reduction and will lose significant money for us every month for 10 years. So it's a big commitment. It doesn't sound as big as you would like it to, but it is a very big commitment to be at 15 units, which is 180 months of rent. You know, it's a significant contribution.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for that answer. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Before I go to Councillor Michalak, Sarah, unfortunately, just at the point when you were talking about the orchards, you did freeze up for about maybe 20 seconds. And just to Councillor Timmer's question about the orchards, maybe I dreamt this, but has there been any collaboration with Vineland Research on behalf of New Horizon? And maybe that would give you an opportunity to speak to that just very briefly.
Thank you, Councillor, Mr. Chairman. I could tell that I froze, so I kind of paused a little bit, hoping that I would catch up. But yes, you're exactly right that Vineland Research did contribute very extensively to the design of that orchard. They provided a report on the plantings that were supposed to be there. They indicated kind of the clustering of the trees in each area and the types of trees that it should be planted, so that the flowering and the time to pick those crops would be staggered throughout the month. So it all wouldn't be in 1 month. It would be staggered through a few months. So there was a lot of detail that was put through the design work towards that. And then they also contributed to reviewing the sun shadow study and to see if the orchard would be affected detrimentally with regards to sun shadow, which it is not affected negatively. So those were a couple inputs that Vineland did have, and they are still involved through the details for the site plan stage, and will be for years to come through this process.
That's great. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to add that, because I think it's important. We've worked with Viric extensively, continue to work with Viric, and they're a very important partner in the town of Lincoln. So thank you for that. Councillor Michalak, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair Brunei, through you to Sarah and Jeff. Thank you for coming in the presentation, and as well to your team. You've assembled quite a team. I don't think there's a question I can ask that I'm confident you're going to be able to get the answer for me. But the question I have is, I see the 2-bedroom unit with and without den. And when I look at these applications, and I watched a webinar last night, and something that goes through my head is, like, if I myself, married to a wife with 2 kids, what sort of condo would I be able to buy that would accommodate me, my wife, and 2 kids? Like, give me an idea of what this den, how big is this den? Would I be able to fit a double bed in there with a dresser? Would my 2 kids have their own bedroom?
So let me take a stab at that, Councillor, and it's a very good question. The build form of condominiums is such that you get to a certain size, and then the price of that unit starts to mirror the price of a 3-bedroom townhouse. Because once you grow it to a certain 2 bedrooms plus, it starts to cost about as much as a townhouse. And in our world, mother, father, 2 children choose the townhouse. So this is really, and it's a big demographic, single parent, 1 child, single parent, 2 children. By law, the den is not supposed to be a bedroom because it doesn't have a window, and therefore, or if it doesn't have a window, it doesn't have a safe egress in case of fire. So it's not intended to be a bedroom. And so you're really looking at mother, father, 2 kids in 1 room in a 2-bedroom condominium. if the den happens to have a window, which some do, you can put a bed in there, but you had asked about a double bed in or a queen size bed, probably not in that format. And if that unit gets to be 700, 750 square feet in today's market, that's a $750,000, $800,000 unit, and 3-bedroom, 2-story or 3-story townhomes are now an option for families, and they would lean that way. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, through you, Chair. It does answer my question. I just look at these things like if me and my wife, we get married and, rewind 25, 27 years, and we have a child, then we have 2, now I have to move. And is there a way to build these things where I wouldn't have to move, right? And that's where I'm going a bit. And, when you say the economies of scale and cost of a townhouse, when I go to these timeshare type resorts, and I'm sure we've all been to these timeshare resorts, they have these sort of flex sort of units where you have a 2-bedroom and a 1-bedroom lock off and this sort of idea. And this may be a question for Barry Graziani, is this at all possible to do anymore with designing or planning these condos?
It's an interesting question, and it's a difficult one to actually find a solution, because what we're dealing with here is ownership. So when a person, based on their affordability, buys a unit, even though it might be a husband and a wife, buys a 2-bedroom, those are the limits of your unit. So we try to allow for convertibility within the space, but again, there's the pressures of what the end price is for an actual condominium unit and its affordability, and that's directly related as a result, to a smaller space, to make it as affordable as possible. We've designed 3-bedroom units that are legal, OBC legal units, and the smallest we get them is probably around, I think the smallest we ever did was about 815 square feet. So when you start to apply that square footage to a cost per square foot, it gets into the realm of final price that just Jeff was mentioning earlier. And then, as a family, what would you prefer, to be in a 815 square foot space, up in the sky somewhere, or have a townhouse which might have a small backyard, but it's more conducive to having a family and children? Hope that helps with answering a question that is very difficult.
Well, I appreciate your response and the economic cost to these things. I suppose that when developers or builders do start building 3-bedroom condos, then townhouses have just become that much more expensive. So that's where we're at. I see.
Councillor Michalak, before I let you proceed, I'm just going to ask Mr. Bruder. I see he's got his hand up, and maybe Matt, you've got something to add to Mr. Graziani's comments. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Really, and through you to the councillor, I just wanted to kind of highlight, just generally, looking at how growth is occurring, looking at kind of diversification or lack thereof currently in some of the residential housing units that we have, particularly in the town of Lincoln. I think what this is about too is really, this is providing, a bigger and better range of potential opportunities here. When I look at some of the statistics in terms of the housing stock that we've already got between townhouses and singles, which, traditionally have been where families like what you've discussed usually go, we're up around, 70% of our housing stock at the moment. So, I just wanted to highlight that, I can certainly appreciate the point, especially from a price point, but really, I think what developments like this really serve to do is address that other part of the demographic too. That's maybe, as Mr. Paikin was identifying, kind of the single parents, the young professionals too, and things like that, where, right now the housing stock in Lincoln really isn't reflective of providing those opportunities to the fullest extent. So I just wanted to add in those comments. Thank you.
appreciate that. I do like the looks of this development. I love the green space, the orchard. It does look like a type of development that if I was to move into, I might want to stay there longer than I probably originally thought. So that's where I'm coming up with my comments. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Patriva, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Brunei and Steve, Jeff and your team. Councillor Brunei and I sat in on the public meeting on the Tuesday afternoon, and I thought it was incredible. And you've kind of taken that up and answered a lot of questions that I had ready to pose tonight. So hopefully there's some other developers watching because this is the way that you do a presentation. There's no sleight of hand. You've laid everything on the table. So couple questions though. We're getting a dedication of frontage along Green Lane in order for a turn lane and some road widening and things like that. You guys too own the Utopia building next door. And some of the consternation online is the public accessing the new GO station and still having to drive to that site. So any thoughts, and I do a lot of driving around the province and I see these all over with these new kind of developments. Any thoughts of a pedestrian bridge linking the two units across the CN tracks to the new potential GO station at some point in time?
Oh, Jeff, would you like to go?
I was just going to say, Councillor, I don't know who you're asking, if it's us or the powers that be on behalf of the town. That's not.
No, that would be to you guys.
Okay, Sarah, then why don't you go ahead and answer?
Sure, I can start. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the councillor. Nothing was established even as conceptual in the secondary plan that is governed on this site. And we haven't seen any design through Metrolinx. As you know, the site is unique and half is urban and half is rural. So I stumble to know if it could be provided on the rural lands and that connection through that portion. I would lean towards the no. And then also with the floodplain as those limits as well. I think those are constraints that wouldn't allow for that access. But as I said, there's no design that we've seen to allow for it.
And the one thing I will add, Councillor, is that it could make a whole lot more sense to have it go from the Sobeys parking lot, but as close to the buildings where people are living as possible, because there'd be a huge benefit to the commercial plaza to have all the pedestrians coming to them first before they go into the various parts of the neighborhood. And that might be a good conversation between Metrolinx and the plaza owners on behalf of the entire community.
Great point. Yeah. And to that too, second question would be any lines on your commercial? Do you have any tenants lined up?
The way these tenants usually work, to answer your question, is not yet. The way these typically work is that until you're actually building it, a business won't plan to be there. So they'll see the sign and they'll take note. It happened with Utopia next door. We had 25 phone calls that were a total waste of time. We dug the hole, we started to build, and a guy ran in and said, I want to put my business here. I want to buy this condominium. And that's a big benefit to the small business owner to not be a renter, but to be an owner.
Yeah.
That because this is part of a condominium, they can buy that unit and own it forever as a family investment and to support their small business, and it's available to them. So we will get the right kind of use in that spot for the benefit of the 600-ish condominium owners that are there on our behalf.
Yeah, great. I mean, I think a dry cleaner would make a killing in there. So maybe I become a venture capitalist and do something like it. So my third question, Chair Brunei, would be around your lead significance. Love the geothermal. Love the solar panels. Permeable pavers that you mentioned in the walkway. We declared a climate crisis a few months ago in the town and are trying to address climate change through a number of initiatives. And you've checked a bunch of the boxes. Now, having had the opportunity to tour the Utopia building with our chief building official, knowing that there's a couple hiccups with the geothermal and getting it to the right temperature, do you experience anything? Do you anticipate experiencing anything like that with this building?
Councillor, I can tell you that I have to brag in these situations. It doesn't come naturally to me, but we have built more geothermal buildings than any builder in Southern Ontario, and our systems work extremely well. We have friends that live in them. We have children that live in them that belong to us, and we have over 1,000 customers who are currently being heated and cooled by our geothermal systems installed by our best-in-class engineer who comes from Winnipeg, because that's where the best-in-class is, and our driller and system designers. There will be no problems at all with this geothermal. Like any other big system in a big building that's got a central room, it needs to get balanced to start. And once it's in balance, we have 24/7 online monitoring of any hiccup of any type, and the system people who manage and monitor it get to the problem and fix it before any resident ever knows it existed because of this direct computer connection, blah, blah, blah. So it's as good as best in class anywhere. We've done it 15 times. This will be 16, and there will be no issue at all with any of that. And I would like to address a couple of other things you mentioned just while I'm on a roll. Number one, thank you for the comments on our presentation. Joe and I take great pride in hiring the kind of people that represent what we want to bring forward, even more so in a small town that we're not from. That we want to have the right kind of image and the right kind of presentation and the right professionals doing the work. And we're extremely, extremely proud of what our team put together for this presentation, and to have it spoken of the way you spoke of. Big thank you from Joe and me towards our team. The second thing is, and by the way, don't tell others to do the same, because you take away our competitive. We got to have a little bit of an edge. The second thing you mentioned about the environmental piece, my daughter's on this call. My partner's son is on this call. They're both in their early to mid 20s. And, 10 years ago, they started to push us, do better for the environment, do better for our future, do the right thing. We both went out and bought Teslas so we could do the right thing. And then we started geothermal in all our buildings. And now we do solar panels in geothermal and very leads oriented. It doesn't make us more money, it costs us money. It's not about the money, it's about doing what's right and having people like you, Councillor, come back to us and say you're doing it right. And so we're extremely proud that you pointed that out so I could brag about it a little more. But it all started with our then 15 and 12-year-old kids saying, you got to do better for us. And that, we do. We have a responsibility to do better.
Yeah, you're so right, Jeff. I've got a 22 and a 27-year-old, and it's about them and it's about their kids. And if we continue to degrade the environment at every opportunity, and what's for them. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair Bernay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Russell, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Jeff. Two questions, and I also have a couple of questions for staff when we get to the report area. The first one, and Councillor Petrie gave me a good segue as far as the geothermal goes, the solar array and the gold level leads standards that you were forecasting for this build. Under Utopia, we did have a community improvement incentive program that provided some direct incentive for those types of items that has since been repealed. I'm just wondering if the new iteration of our CIP, when it does come out, if it doesn't contain any incentives for a geothermal or solar array or those types of activities, would there be any changes to your plans for this development?
No, sir, not a bit. we're going to do the right thing because it's the right thing.
Perfect. It's a great answer. Appreciate that. The second one, also along the green standard, we did have a great question from one of our residents about potential for electric vehicle charging. I know I did ask this to staff, but I thought it would be great to go to you, not only for on the outside, but again, for your residents inside. Is there any standards or anything that you guys are planning for charging stations within the parking?
I'm really glad you asked that question too. So rather than having centralized charging stations, we create a conduit that allows for any of the parking spots, because remember, these are owned. So where your car goes is where your car goes, because that's your spot. We have a conduit to that spot that will allow for a very simple future installation of your own private, and I have one myself in our condominium in Burlington, so I know it works great. The transformer that feeds the building has to have enough capacity to provide the power required for the cars. So we can't speak for the hydro utility provider, but we can set the table in the underground that any spot in the underground can have its own electric charging station once the world catches up and allows enough hydro to be available for that purpose. And we did have to get Burlington Hydro, in the case of the big building in Burlington, for both us and the hotel to up their game and get a bigger transformer and balance the use during the night and during the day, so that when hydro is being used less at night, they expect the cars to be plugged in, et cetera, et cetera. We're geared up for all of that. It's what I drive, it's what my partner drives, and it's going to be ready for anyone to drive it, providing there's enough hydro at the street to provide it. And if there's not, there will be eventually, because you'll all be driving them sooner or later.
I just want to add to Jeff's comment. Every single building we're building from now on it's roughed in for EV charger for their parking spot.
Wow, that's great. Again, thank you very much for that. Again, I think it's been echoed by a number of the councilors tonight that you guys really are setting a new standard for expectations. And again, I think it's very appreciative from our community. Thank you.
Mayor Easton, please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Well, Jeff, thank you for coming this evening. And Joe also, this is pretty important. It's been some time since you were here to talk about the other project, which is coming along very well. This one kind of wraps right around it, I think. That's what the picture looks like to me. So thank you very much for being here. The face-to-face is so important. I think Councillor Russell's comment, we're turning the corner here, I think, on the way building has been done and the attitude of developers that are really embracing the right-minded changes that need to be part of the project, not part of an incentive necessarily. So having said that, is there anything about this project that you're just burning to try, but it's not in there yet?
That's a good question. I want to remind you, Mayor Easton, that when you first heard about the name of the building that we're building right now, you had a very good chuckle in front of me saying, "Oh, Utopia." And I can tell you that, we do this in a lot of places with a lot of various municipalities and their staff and their councillors. And it does feel like utopia, that we're dealing very professionally, very openly, very honestly with good people. Your staff are great to work with. This is not a butter up job. I'm just telling you this because the last time we talked about it was a long time ago. And so we're very excited. We're extremely excited about this Greenbelt opportunity to be part of how it interacts between the community that we're creating, the community that you have created and live there every day, the walking path terminating right at the orchard, how we can make that work. And we've heard some intelligent people give us some good advice tonight. to make sure it works. And, I was very pleased to hear Sarah's answer, because I missed that meeting, about how we've planned for the various different types of trees that come to fruition for the fruit at different times of the year. So there's more reason to come there more frequently. And I think it's a great social consideration to integrate the people in the building with the people in the neighborhood through that outdoor space. It's a very unique opportunity. It's not something that we've had a chance to do at this scale before. And I'm just excited beyond excitement to see how it works out. And Joe and I are extremely committed to finding the right people to maintain that space so it does what it was intended to do. Adding all of that into the design that GNC came up with, it doesn't look like a building. It looks like a series of buildings. It looks like a streetscape from the side. It doesn't look like one long monolithic. We've put elevators in different places. So your walk from the elevator is not down a bowling alley hallway, but it's 3 or 4 or 5 units in any direction you get to your door. There's just so much good going on here that was kind of forced on us. The other thing that I'm really excited about is, we're at the very edge of a very nice and beautifully established single family, mostly home neighborhood, with one really good looking condominium building being built in it right now. And the way, it's just probably dumb luck, but at the street, we provide commercial interaction and we provide the orchard and the planting interaction between the existing community and the new community. And the scale at the street is appropriate. When we bought the site next door, it was zoned and designed for 8 stories. The first thing we did is lower it to 6 because we wanted to be good neighbors. Here we started at what appears to be 2, and it's all commercial, so it's a benefit to all. Then it goes back to a little bit higher, and then it goes back to, by the time we get the part above 6 stories, it's so far away from the existing residents, it's like it's in a different neighborhood. These kind of well thought out, well planned by our team within this community, it's just going to be a grand slam home run for all. I'm convinced it's going to be a big win for the people who get a chance to own their own place. They get to live in utopia and the neighborhood of utopia, and they also live in a place that's doing it right and sort of sending a message that all of this burns in me. To answer your question, I think it's really exciting and fantastic.
Okay, well, that's glad. I'm very glad that you feel the pride that you do, and that you put all that effort into ensuring that that council and the community, most importantly, has been brought along into this. Certainly, we've seen very little angst being expressed about what you're doing here. I have a question, Jeff, about the floodplain, because I'm wondering, it's mentioned several times. I'm trying to establish how significant it is. I can find this out, by talking offline. Is there anything about where it's located or its relationship to the building that you're proposing that you think could be problematic?
I mean, my across the board answer is no, because our people and your staff have gone back and forth 500 times on this to ensure it isn't. But we have experts on the call who know this stuff a lot better than I do, that I'm happy, Sarah, if you want to defer this to either you or to Steve or to somebody who is much better at this particular piece than me, that would be great.
Thanks, Jeff. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the mayor. I can start, Steve, and maybe you can say if I'm saying the correct thing or not. But on that one plan that we showed on the slide with those colors, the green, brown, and the yellow, it was that green area that, or the green in the northwest corner that was the flood line. And that was established based on on-site elevations. So it was on-site work. It wasn't taken from 400 feet up. It was on-site work that was evaluated and analyzed, and the analysis was done by Steve at Lanhec and his team, and that was vetted through the Conservation Authority. So they supported that elevation number for the 100-year flood line. And that is not where the building is. It is in that northwest corner. So Steve, if you wanted to speak to safety and the habitable area and whatnot.
Thank you, Sarah. The area, have you noticed that we have a large swale beside the building going north and going west to the Conkle Creek? By creating that for the purposes of our development, we've created 1,300 plus cubic meters extra storage of floodplain. So if anything, we've actually made your situation better for flooding by 1,300 cubic meters, sorry. So it is positive. And we are, our finished floor, as per your standards and the conservation standards, we are 1 foot freeboard. So there's no openings within 1 foot of the floodplain elevation. So there's no possible way that we can have a problem with that floodplain, with the building we're designing.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. And as I said, I can certainly get more technical information if I need it from the staff. So Jeff, I just want to ask you about the commercial, Mr. Chairman, if you'll indulge me. I'm interested to know, I've forgotten, how many units do we have at Utopia?
In terms of a commercial, there's only one commercial unit at Utopia.
Okay. And so what are you planning for here?
I don't know if it's defined as how many units, but it's defined in the size. And we have to remember that we're right beside the biggest regional grocery store, commercial plaza, like right next door. So this has to be destination. It's not going to be, this is what we have here is appropriate for food restaurant. It's appropriate for a dentist. It's appropriate for somewhere people will go to specifically for what the use is there. It's probably not your typical retail. And the amount of space, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, or maybe you can just jump in, give me the exact square footage.
302.4 square meters, or just over 3,200 square feet.
Right. So it's going to be 1, 2, or 3 units, depending on the use and the end user buyer who will own it, as I mentioned earlier. And as we start to construct it, we want to find the ones that make the most sense, that we believe have the best chance to succeed in their business plan in that location. But ultimately, it's going to be what it's going to be based on whoever owns that space down the road. So because it's a 2-story offering, but it's 1 story, it's got big high ceilings. It's got, potential for a good feel, a good space, a lot of airiness. Personally, I would love to see something like an offshoot food and local brewery, local winery, putting an offering to the community there that's not a late night one, but sort of a lunch dinner and then close down, not a night bar, or a dentist doctor, because there's 600 new residences there to support what is in that community that could support that sort of thing. It won't be, as much as I love the entrepreneurship of the dry cleaner and the nail salon, and I don't think it's going to be that, because it's not an urban street setting. It's not a downtown setting. It's a place you go to specifically for whatever ends up there.
That's great. Thank you very much. Well, let me just reinforce what you've heard from the rest of the team, and thank you very much for being here personally to address our questions. And thank you, Joe, for participating as well. And Sarah, you were the lead throughout all of this, and thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Rinjama, I did say that I would come back to you. Do you have one additional question, or are you good?
Thank you, Chair Renee, for coming back to me. My question was answered. It was about floodplain, and I heard the answer, so thank you.
Great. Councillor Michalak, could you please take the chair for a few brief moments so I could make a comment and maybe ask a question?
Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you. So through you, Chair, to Sarah and the team. I'm sitting here in the chambers this evening because my connection at home has been problematic, and I'm reflecting on, I believe, 5 years ago, 2017, when we were meeting at a public meeting to talk about the current development that you're doing, and reflecting on all the comments and the discussion that took place in preparation for that development. I don't think it's any coincidence then that 5 years later, as we sit here after 2 public meetings and now this meeting tonight, where there are no delegations, that this just isn't happening by osmosis. So I think council's comments tonight are true. I think they're sincere. And I think that we are hearing from this developer something that works for the community, a collaboration and a partnership that we haven't seen. So for that, I thank you. I also sat in the public meeting, and I asked Adam from Paradigm a couple of questions about traffic. Sarah, I believe you mentioned that he's on the call this evening. If I'm hearing any questions in the community, it is about traffic. It is about flow. I'm wondering through you, Chair, if Adam, if he is on the call, if he could, for the benefit of the people that might be listening in the community tonight, who are concerned about, you know, developments happening on Green Lane, your development where people had just started to move in last week, I believe, a new school that's going to be built in the corner of Ontario Street. I'm wondering what you could tell us as a community, what your traffic study are telling to try to appease some of those concerns about traffic and flow.
Thank you, Councillor. That's a great question. So as with the development application, we completed a traffic impact study that looked at the existing volumes on Green Lane, as well as the future volumes when we look at population employment growth for the area, as well as other known developments. And what we found is that with the additional traffic added to Green Lane Road, there is still sufficient capacity to accommodate the additional traffic. With respect to Ontario Green Lane, I think we acknowledge that it's a challenging intersection. There's currently a bit of congestion occurring during the morning and afternoon rush hours. We've identified that the town, in collaboration with the region, is reviewing basically a streetscape master plan for Ontario Street that is looking at improvement options to address those congestion issues.
That's great, Adam. I appreciate those comments, and I hope that we do have people on the call that have heard that, and I'm sure the ward councillors are in discussion with any of those people that have those concerns, and I'm sure they will be passing those along. So I appreciate that. I don't see any other hands. Chair Michalak, thank you for taking the chair.
Councillor Renee, would it be okay if I could just make one comment if everybody is completed?
Absolutely, Mr. Bacon, please go ahead.
I know this is way off base, but I want to drag the guy walking around in pajamas in to say hello to you all. This is the third generation of Bacon on this call, my daughter Natasha, who you heard from earlier. And 95% of the reason that he's here is a week ago, he was with my brother in Queen's Park, paying tribute to his late, great best friend in the world, Marv Shore, whose father, Sam, ran the Beamsville General Store.
Oh my gosh.
And my father wanted to know if we could name this building in honor of Marv. And I said, no, people want to live in utopia, not in the land of Marv Shore. But I just thought it would be a nice thing to share that his best friend in the world was born and raised in Beamsville. They met each other at Western 70 years ago. And my 88-year-old dad wanted to sit in on something that had something to do with Beamsville because of it. So thank you for indulging the pajamas in the background.
Larry, Larry, you're the
That's
best.
unbelievable.
Larry, you're the best.
And every week, Marv got the Beamsville Express
Sent to London?
to our room in London where we were roommates.
Wow.
So there.
Larry, you're the best.
Wow, Mr. Chairman, that's unbelievable. Sam Shores, I can remember, I mean, walking into that store, it had this very distinctive smell to it because it was a dry goods store. I remember that very, very clearly. Welcome, Mr. Peak, and welcome.
Well, your Beamsville native was duly honored at Queen's Park. He passed away just before COVID, so they had to wait until now to bring his wife, who's in her 80s, and his friends and sons and grandsons and great-grandchildren. And they had a beautiful tribute to a Beamsville native. So there. Thank you for letting me do that, Councilor Brunet. I appreciate it.
Yeah, that story reflected on me when you told me that your brother and your father were at Queen's Park, and you couldn't be there because you were meeting in the Beamsville room at the same time. So talk about irony.
Everything connects, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you to the entire team. There being no further delegations for this item, I now declare this public meeting to address the zoning bylaw amendment by GSP for 5103 Green Lane adjourned. I have a motion moved by Councillor Rinjema that council receive and file as information the following delegation item regarding item 5.1 zoning bylaw amendment for 5103 Green Lane Road by GSP Group, Sarah Knoll, GSP Group. And I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Pachariva?
Yes.
Mayor Easton?
Support.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Rajima?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Micklick?
Yes.
Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. That carries.
Thank you. We will now move directly into the report PD 19-22 regarding the zoning bylaw amendment by GSP Group for 5103 Green Lane Road. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Russell, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, and I again to thank you for providing me another segue as far as traffic goes. So as you mentioned in your question, we do get a lot of questions, concerns about traffic along Green Lane and on Ontario. I'm just wondering, for those who are watching, if staff could just provide a very, very brief outline of what we might be able to expect down the road for this area of Green Lane and Ontario Street. I know we have some redevelopment plans coming up. We have the visioning exercise in Ontario Street. I'm wondering if you could just give a very, very brief high level overview of what is coming down the road to address some of the traffic concerns on these two major intersections, or this major intersection of these 2 points. So through you, maybe to Mr. Bruder or Mr. Worthington.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to direct that to Ms. Shi, to Melissa, and possibly after that, if Mr. Bruder wants to jump in. But Melissa, could you please go ahead?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the councillor. So yes, the town has done a significant amount of planning, both in the medium term and long term for these corridors. Our transportation master plan was completed in 2019 and modeled traffic growth up to 2041 and identified medium to long-term future improvements, which include intersection improvements to Ontario and Green Lane, as well as possibly road widening along Ontario Street. So in light of the development applications that have been coming forward in the area, the town has conducted further traffic analysis of the Ontario Street and Green Lane corridors with the updated development numbers that we're seeing to full build out. And this assessment has verified that Green Lane Road is expected to operate within acceptable service levels to build out, and that in the future mid to long term, the improvements that have been identified in the town's transportation master plan will sufficiently address future growth needs.
Thank you for that, Ms. Shi. And just a quick follow-up on that, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Councillor.
I don't know if this is possible, Nishi, but is it possible to just give a time horizon as far as what mid to long term might mean? Again, it's not written in stone, but just again, for those watching, so they can kind of get an idea of what the expectation is.
Yep. I believe the mid was a 10-year time frame up to 20 years.
Okay, thank you for that. And final question, Mr. Chair, through you.
Go ahead.
Okay, to staff. So I had a question come in from a resident about concerns about water flow. And in one of the reports, there was a quote of about a 275 per capita water flow per day for this new building. And the resident was concerned, again, it's a resident that lives in the adjacent neighborhood, how this may impact the overall water levels and water flow for the area. Wondering if there was a high estimate to be included. It seems to her that there was a bit of a low estimate. So I'm just wondering if staff could just provide a little bit of insight into our water capacity in this area. I know we have had just a little bit further down the road near the corner of Lincoln and Green Lane some issues with some water pipes bursting. Wondering if there's any impacts on that, or if anybody can provide any insight.
I can take that through you, Mr. Chair. The development itself won't impact the supply of water to the area. There's sufficient supply coming from the Grimsby water treatment plant. The breaks that you speak of all along Lincoln are age-related, not in any way related to the development that Lincoln has seen. There are some improvements that would be made as part of the Green Lane works for the water main itself to bring it up to a newer water main as well. And that will just in turn also improve flow within the area. We do have our smart hydrants as well that monitor, but we're confident with the modeling that's been provided by our consultant and what's been provided to the functioning services plan that all items will be addressed. And we do highlight in it that there would be partial holding provisions as well for just that section of water main along that short stretch. Sorry, no one can see my hands. I forget that we're on camera and not in person anymore. But sorry, but that one section of water main will be upsized as part of that works that we're doing. So an improvement on material and then a slight increase. And that's mainly to address fire flow considerations as well. But residents will not be impacted.
Thank you, Ms. Harrison. I appreciate that. And as a teaser for anybody watching at home, we do have a very excellent water report coming up that's going to outline a lot of that Ms. Harrison sure is going to be a star in describing. So thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Ms. Harris.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rinjima, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to ask a little bit more about Green Lane and the plans for Green Lane, just to add to what Councillor Russell had asked. What, at this point, I know we haven't done the detailed design, and I believe that we're supposed to start that this year. I note that in the report, the cross section shows Green Lane is 23 meters. And I'm guessing it's currently 66 feet. And so what are the extra 9 meters proposed for, and where is that coming from? Is that a sidewalk, or is that landscaping in front of the current building? So I see that cross section. And what do we know about what we'll have to do to Green Lane in that area in the long run? I know we don't have the detailed design done, but can I get just a little bit of discussion on that? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Graham, would you like to tackle that one?
Thank you, Chair, and to the councillor. Great question. So as part of this development and other developments along Green Lane in this area, we are taking a road widening, that 3-meter road widening that you were referring to. And that's really to give the town flexibility with the Green Lane design. So we're currently initiating the visionary exercise for Green Lane, similar to what's going on with the Ontario Street work, because we want to ensure that there's alignment with Green Lane and Ontario Street. And really the focus for Green Lane is we want to really incorporate and implement complete streets. So in that area, we're going to need more room to have wider sidewalks, accommodate active transportation, high level of streetscaping as it relates to, you know, street furniture, benches, decorative lighting, things like that. So that is why we want to have additional width to that to the road allowance. It's not necessarily to make the road wider for vehicles. I think you heard earlier on in the presentation that Green Lane will remain a 2-lane road. It'll be upgraded, of course, but really the focus is to have that complete streets implementation on this project.
Okay, and a clarification question, Mr. Chair?
Yes, please go ahead.
So as the existing sidewalks behind the homes on St. Volodymyr, there's been an issue with water puddling on them and freezing and people slipping. So I guess through this process, we'll be able to deal with that and correct that.
Through Mr. Chairman, to the councillor, absolutely. We'll be looking at a new cross section, and yeah, we'll be improving any drainage issues and that are there today, of course, through that process.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Deputy Clerk, I'm not seeing any more hands. Is there anything what I'm missing? No?
No, you're good to go, Chair.
Okay, thank you. There being no further questions, I have a motion moved by Councillor Russell that council receive for information report PD 19-22 regarding the zoning bylaw amendment application by GSP Group Inc. on behalf of New Horizon Development Group, and direct staff to prepare a recommendation report once all comments have been received and any identified issues have been addressed. I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Reimer,
Yes.
Councillor Micklick,
Yes.
Councillor Russell,
Yes.
Councillor McPherson,
Yes.
Councillor Rajima,
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva,
Yes.
Mayor Easton,
Support.
Councillor Timmers,
Yes.
Chair.
Yes.
Thank you. That carries.
Thank you, Deputy Clerk. We have now concluded the statutory public meeting section of the agenda, and I will now continue to the consent agenda. We have no items on the consent agenda this evening, and we will move into the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. We are now at that portion, and we will move into 7.1 delegations. There are no delegations this evening for the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda. And moving into report 7.2, we will now consider item 7.2.1, zoning bylaw amendment by Upper Canada Consultants for 3185 Tintern Road, PD 16-22. Do members of council have any questions? Mayor Easton.
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to focus on the letter that came from Mr. Unraw. My question is to staff, and what has gone into assisting with addressing his concerns, and in the minds of staff, have these been resolved, or is there more that needs attention? And I'm referring to the letter that was included in the correspondence.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'm going to refer that to Mr. Workington. Josh, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So to answer Mayor Easton's question, I've been personally working with Mr. Unruh to address some of his questions and concerns related to the items that were brought forward in the letter. Regarding the sump pump, from a technical perspective, the sump pump pipe is buried and leads directly to the ditch, outletting directly into it, and passes through a very small parcel of the adjoining property. This wasn't done, maliciously. It was done 50 years, 40 years ago. So it is a legal non-conforming use. Staff's position is that, if we would consider this to be grandfathered, and if the pipe did need to be repaired at any point, that town would work with the applicant to help improve the ditch and also address the situation. Part of the complexity here is that in order to have the sump pump drain into the ditch, he would have to bring it to the surface, build a new swale, and have that swale lead to the ditch. Where the complication is that there's a culvert currently, they're blocking the ditch on his portion of the property. So we would work with the applicant to facilitate that dilemma should it appear. Regarding the interior side yard setback, we do note that, there are concerns with whenever there's new development happening, that change is occurring, and that sometimes that change impacts the way people have been living or used to a certain environment. I should note that this lot meets all of the zoning regulations. And so we typically in the planning realm don't want to provide zoning regulations that go beyond the current ones that are in place, particularly if they meet them, unless there's a technical reason or site-specific reason for them. So in this case, there aren't. What we've instructed the applicant is that, based on what the market is like, someone who's purchasing a lot out in Tintern is unlikely going to want to live right beside someone else. But we have been speaking with him, and I have been instructing Mr. Unruh about this. Lastly, with regards to the natural fence, as Mr. Unruh did mention, there are some constraints in terms of the proximity of the existing septic to the lot line. Town staff are supportive of working with the applicant as well as Mr. Unruh to find a solution to this. We're not opposed to a natural type of vegetative fence in the form of trees or shrubs or anything like that. The one dilemma is if these forms of vegetation can't be placed on Mr. Unruh's property, the town has no mechanisms in place, because this is a rural property, for ensuring that those trees aren't removed by the future landowner. So I hope that answers your question, Mayor Easton, but if not, feel free to ask some more.
All right, Mr. Chairman, yes, thank you, Josh. That was very helpful. I just want to make sure that the issue about the septic tank has been, do you feel that it has been sufficiently addressed?
Through you, Chair, it has. I personally visited the site and inspected it in terms of where its general location is, and it is fully on Mr. Unruh's property.
Okay, all right. So one of the other things, Mr. Workington, is that I just want to make sure that I'm not overstating this at all. But there were concerns that were raised about the property having the ability to have more lots created in the future. That was one of my interpretations. I know there was a comment about there being a trailer park, and but mostly what I took out of it was in some other discussion where that was coming through, that maybe there was something going on here that might end up where there might be other lots that would be created in the future. Can you tell me what your analysis of that is? Is that factual in any way?
So through you, Chair, that is not correct. The area outside of the Hamlet residential designation is listed as or subject to the prime agricultural lands policy. And under that policy, a maximum of one single detached dwelling can be provided or built on it. And non-agricultural land use activities are prohibited from it. To that as well, there's no potential for the Hamlet residential boundary to expand, primarily because this is not an growth area. And we are trying to preserve as much agricultural land as possible in Lincoln and for Ontario as well.
Okay. Now, Mr. Chairman, I don't believe that I know Mr. Unruh, but he made it clear this afternoon in his letter that he wasn't able to be here, couldn't make arrangements to be here. And so in the last paragraph in his letter, Josh, the last sentence is, we're also concerned about the potential of future loss from further expansion as bylaws continue to be amended for unnecessary reasons. Now, I don't want to read too much into that. As you already noted, if you've lived in an area for quite some time, any changes, you're going to be having some questions and concerns. Was that part of any discussion that you had with Mr. Unruh in terms of your expressing and explaining what the limitations were of this application and what we're approving here tonight, or we expect to approve?
Through you, Chair. That's a great question. I can't specifically remember if I spoke to Mr. Unruh about this. I do recall that I did say this to multiple members or residents of Tintern, just to reassure them that urban style developments can't occur on lands outside of the hamlet residential. But I'm more than happy to reach out to Mr. Unruh to clarify this point as well tomorrow or in the future.
He didn't specifically ask for it, but I'm trying to do my best, as we all are here tonight, to ensure that the concerns of the residents are being put forward. So thank you very much, Josh. I'm sure you'll be having other additional discussions as time goes by. Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'm glad you raised those questions. I did, in preparation for tonight's meeting, I did reach out to staff after getting a copy of the letter, and I can assure you that all the comments that Mr. Workington gave you and your question are consistent with the responses I've received this afternoon. So I'm pleased you raised those.
Thank you.
Councillor Reimer, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Brunei. My first couple of questions were addressed by Mayor Easton with regards to Mr. Unruh and his utilities concerns there. So thank you very much for the answer. And just to tag along on that, this is a small little community in our community, and so this kind of thing creates quite a change in people's lives. And I just wanted to thank staff, as Josh mentioned, he spent a lot of time with Mr. Unruh, so thanks staff for working with the residents there through this application. One other question I would have, Chair Brunei, through to Josh, just regarding number 1 on the list of conditions, and it's just a confirmation. It reads that potable water for all proposed dwellings be provided only by a cistern, and that construction of a private well for potable well is prohibited. I'm assuming that all wells are prohibited. So a well for irrigation, a well for something other than potable water. Just want clarification on that.
Through you, Chair, that's a good question. So my understanding is that yes, that is the indication is provided by the hydrogeological report. And if the wording of that needs to be tweaked in a minor way, then we can provide that. But
and I will bring that up, Josh, because of the some of the concerns from some of the other residents about their well supply, and just reading that, just making sure that we're confining the potable water concern to cisterns only, and that no other wells can be drilled on these properties. So thank you very much, Josh. Thank you, Chair Brunei.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Timmers, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair Brunei. Thank you to Mayor Easton and Councillor Reimer. I think all of the concerns have been addressed very well. When there's expansion into an area where people have lived a long time, it is always stressful and difficult. And I want to thank Josh for working with the residents in the area. I certainly don't have a specific question. I just wanted to make those comments. I think the question around parcel 1, what can happen there? I think just the understanding that these lots are within the hamlet area. they are inside that boundary, and that's why this application could come forward. And it's parcel 1, I think, Josh, you've already answered that is not going to be developed. It's not going to be a future subdivision. And I know that was a real concern for the residents in that area. But you've already clarified that. So I'm satisfied, Councillor Bruni. Chair Bruni, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Clerk, I'm not seeing any other hands. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything before I move on.
You're good to go.
Thank you. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Timmers. The council approve report PD 16-22 regarding the zoning bylaw amendment by Ethan Lamont of Upper Canada Consultants on behalf. Must be something missing here. On behalf, subject to the following. On behalf. Okay. Let me start again. Council approve report PD 16-22 regarding the zoning bylaw amendment by Ethan Lamont of Upper Canada Consultants on behalf of the subject to the following conditions. Number 1, that potable water for all proposed dwellings be provided only by a cistern, and that the construction of a private well for potable water, I believe it should say, is prohibited. The tile drainage systems beneath the lands to be severed are to be removed to prevent the capture of potential sewage effluent from the proposed dwelling's private septic systems. Number 3, that the location of the existing private septic service presently serving the house at 2949 Tintern Road be identified and to confirm that it is not located on the subject lands. And that number 4, that the applicant obtain consent approval from the town to create the proposed lots. And that council enact and pass zoning bylaw attached as Appendix D of reports PD-1622 to amend the zoning regulations for the lands at 3185 Tintern Road to permit a decrease to the minimum lot size and lot frontage for parcels 3 through 6. That council deem that zoning bylaw XX conforms to the official plan for the town of Lincoln, and that council declare that they have considered all of the written and oral submission and agrees with the planning report analysis and recommendations, and finds that subject to the condition of approval, this application meets the Planning Act criteria, is consistent with the provincial policy statement, and complies with the growth plan, the Niagara Region official plan, and the town official plan. And I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Micklick?
Yes.
Mayor Easton?
Support.
Councillor Regina?
Yes.
Councillor Patriba?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Councillor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. That carries.
Thank you, Deputy Clerk. We will now consider item 7.2.2, report PD 18-22 regarding municipal law enforcement 2021 year in review. And our manager of municipal law enforcement will now proceed with the presentation. Mr. Barkway, it's all yours.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Chair, and thank you, Council. I appreciate the opportunity to make this presentation. I will be speaking in regards to the happenings for municipal law enforcement for the year of 2021. And just want to make this presentation and bring everybody up to speed and be aware of what has taken place for this office. If we can go to the next slide. So a couple of things I want to do through this presentation is introduce you to the staff. I know most of you may have seen or met, but with the pandemic over the last 2 years, I think there's been an opportunity where people may not have been seen as much. I'll speak about the call volume that we've experienced in over 2021, parking, some major investigations. Also speak briefly in regards to COVID itself, and then moving forward. If we can go to the next slide. So within municipal law enforcement, we have 3 full-time officers. We have a part-time officer. We have myself as manager, and we have an admin assistant. John DiLoretto is a full-time officer, and he was hired as a part-time officer back in 2017. He became hired as the first full-time officer with Lincoln in 2019. Jason Pigeon was hired with Lincoln in 2020, and he came with experience dating back to 2010, where he started as a park warden with Algonquin Park. From 2016 to 2018, he was with Armour, Ontario as a municipal law enforcement officer. 2018 to 2020, he worked for Hamilton as a forest conservation officer, and now with successfully for the last year and a half, almost with Town of Lincoln. Mike Keogh is the 3rd full-time officer. He was hired to our office in June of 2021. He started his municipal law enforcement career in 1999 with Kitchener as a parking and noise bylaw officer. He did that until 2003, and from 2003 to 2006, he worked with Brampton bylaw. From 2006 to 2011, he was with Brant in Waterloo in property standards. 2011 to 2018, he was with Kitchener as corporate security. From 2018 to 2021, he was with Thorold as municipal law enforcement officer. And then, as I said, in June of 2021, we hired him to be a full-time officer with us. I also want to touch on Braden D'Amico as a part-time officer. He came to us in the summer, and the initial plan was to utilize him for the clean yards investigations, complaints, and parking enforcement. And he has proven himself to be very valuable for our office as a secondary officer for many calls that we've been on. And he has continued and stayed with us and is taking on many other files, normal investigative files throughout the year as well. And we're glad to have him aboard. Lisa Crowley is the admin assistant for municipal law enforcement and with public works. She splits duties between the two. She started in 2018 as a CSR and moved to public works within as an admin in 2019. And then in September of 21, started sharing duties between public works and municipal law enforcement. And I am Mike Barkway, and I'm the manager of municipal law enforcement. You guys hired me in November of 2020. Yes, November 2020. And I've been gratefully working here ever since, and enjoy every day that I'm doing it. We'll go to the next slide. We look back in 2021, I'll say that the total call volume was 1,171 calls. I can tell you that stats are hard to come by from previous years, but what I have found is that in 2018, the total call volume for the year was 339 calls. And in 2019, the total call volume was 512 calls for the year. So there's been a dramatic increase, a huge uptake in the amount of calls that are being received, complaints, investigations that have to go on. The demand for municipal law enforcement's involvement is increasing yearly. And you see that the numbers do fluctuate from the quarters, but they do maintain themselves throughout the year. And within that are different types of investigations. So sometimes when we may not have as many, but the investigations may be more involved than others. Within the call volume, I'll just say that the breakdown includes parking, which is generally the most important or the highest number of calls. COVID for this last year has been the second highest regularly. Property standards, and then seasonally with like sidewalks or clean yards. If we go to the next slide, I've also given you an example of the demand in the different areas. Generally, Beamsville does demand the most attention from municipal law enforcement in regards to call volume. These include investigations and inquiries and just general complaints, but they would be based in Beamsville. Vineland usually is between second and third. Jordan had one quarter where they did creep up, and Camden. Now, even though the call volume may be lower in some of those locations, I would like to stress that that doesn't mean that municipal law enforcement isn't out in those areas regularly. Being a resident of Jordan, I can quantify that I see the bylaw vehicles out and about regularly. So I do know that they are attending all the areas and being proactive as well as reactive. We can go to the next slide. One thing I want to talk, if we can go back one slide, sorry, my apologies. One thing I do want to bring up is when we look at the 1,171 calls that were handled within 2021, that averages out to 97.5 calls per month. And with 3 full-time officers, that's 32.5 calls per officer per month on a regular basis throughout the year that they've had to handle. And that would be anything from inquiries to full-fledged investigations, which is a large demand on three full-time officers. So if we can move ahead. Parking offense notices. This year, as I experienced at the end of 2020 when I was hired, parking enforcement was affected greatly by the pandemic and the continual stay-at-home orders and a lot of working from home. With that came a decision for some of the time to create some additional leniency. So you can see that there is a change from the first quarter to the fourth quarter of the year in regards to parking enforcement and offense notices that had been issued. But now it's back to normal enforcement, both reactive and proactive by the officers in all areas. I can say that additionally to this slide that I can speak to the fact that there was, with the total of 223 tickets issued in 2021, the fines collected was $5,954.90. We can go to the next slide. So major investigations, there were many. I'm just bringing up some numbers for some of the larger ones that we had. Major investigations take a lot of time, take a lot of energy, take a lot of staff hours, and a lot of these ones end up going to court in some form or fashion. Site alteration and placement of fill. We had 3, 2 of them were in respect to the same property over different periods of the year. And the same property resulted in 2 different cease work orders having to be issued. And unfortunately, later on the month following the last cease work order, the town through legal counsel had to seek and obtain a court injunction in order to stop any further work happening. And I've confirmed that that injunction is still in place and being maintained to this date. We had one large zoning investigation that took place over 2021. That was in regards to a property that was agricultural property, large in nature, that was operating a storage facility on its property. This also included a lot of staffing hours to investigate, inspect, follow up, do compliance checks. It ultimately resulted in charges being laid, court time, and the corporation that was involved was found guilty on 1 count, and there was a fine. The investigating officer has continued to work with one of the named corporate officers for the property and gain compliance before the end of the summer with the remainder of the property and no more use of storage for the property itself. Clean yards, we've had 2 major investigations, and both of those were completed throughout the year very successfully. One with gaining compliance with the property owner after a long period of time, and the other one having to have contracted workers in to clear the property scrap metal vehicles and other storage material. The other one I would like to touch on is the obnoxious odors in cannabis. We had 3 major cannabis investigations go on through 2021. This is a result of the public nuisance bylaw that staff passed in 2021. And obnoxious odors is a provision within the public nuisance bylaw. In this case, the obnoxious odors dealt with or were related to cannabis operation facilities, and municipal law enforcement were involved in investigations coming out of community members' complaints about odors. And as I expressed when we were going through the process of getting the public nuisance bylaw and the obnoxious odors section, it's not a one-off. There's a long period of time that's involved in trying to determine where the odor is coming from. It can't be an assumed thing just because one property is believed to be. So the officers take a lot of time and a lot of appearances in different areas based on weather conditions, times, wind conditions, in order to isolate where odors may or may not be coming from and to confirm whether odors are actually present. In one of the large scale operations, it was working in conjunction with the Niagara Regional Police and the provincial drug unit, and it resulted in multiple search warrants across the Niagara region in Southern Ontario, one property in the town of Lincoln. There were numerous criminal code and federal charges laid against numerous individuals, as well as zoning and building code offenses for the property itself. And municipal law enforcement worked very well with all the other agencies for a successful completion in that one. The second investigation for a separate facility was in the middle of investigation, and the date of attendance with Niagara Regional Police for a compliance check, it was deemed that the property had been abandoned by the people that were alleged to have been conducting a cannabis operation. The facility was empty, but there was evidence that it was in fact a cannabis operation, and we confirmed later that the property had been put up for sale. And that property, I believe, still is vacant to this point. The third major investigation we have is actually still ongoing, and it is in relation to a federally licensed or Health Canada licensed facility. And we are working as we speak with Health Canada to try and gain cooperation and compliance in regards to confirming odor mitigation is in place within the facility itself. We can go to the next slide. So I don't want to touch on the impact of the demands of COVID-19 over the last year, actually over the last 2 years, but I can only speak to the end of 2020 and all of 2021. I know 175 incidents don't sound like a big number when we're talking out of 1,171, but these incidents were not like at the beginning of my time with the town of Lincoln with municipal law enforcement, where it was people calling in asking about whether they could wear a mask or couldn't wear a mask. The majority of these were incidents that involved dealing with individuals or businesses that were making attempts to either not fully comply with the EMPCA and the ROA with the restrictions, or were not fully aware of what was needed or mandatory at the time. There's a lot of review and research that has to be done by the officers, by my office, with the ever-changing restrictions that have been in place over the time of the pandemic. It also resulted in a positive way in the formulation of all the municipality managers of bylaw within the Niagara region, forming a group that meets regularly to try to read through and determine the best practice in regards to approach for the regulations. Now that's moving forward with just day-to-day operations with bylaw, which is fantastic. It added a lot of stress and extra demands on the officers. I'd like to point out that the enforcement and the investigation of any allegations or anything to do with the pandemic and the restrictions laid squarely on the shoulders of municipal law enforcement and the police services. That being said, a lot of it was with municipal law enforcement, or bylaws, people call it. And that's a lot of extra demands on officers that don't generally deal with these types of things. And as we have all seen, there was a drop in people's support of, some people's support of the regulations and restrictions that were in place, COVID fatigue. And with that there came an increase in the amount of hostile or negative interactions with people, with bylaw officers across the province, across the country, across North America, and unfortunately even with the town of Lincoln. My officers, I can honestly say, held themselves up very, very well. They maintained an amazing amount of professionalism throughout all these difficult situations, and could not have done it without their stamina and their professionalism through the whole thing. It's a testament to who's hired and who's here as bylaw officers for the town of Lincoln. They represented the town very well throughout this pandemic, and I just want to acknowledge the hard work and the added stress that was put on them and how well they handled the whole thing. We can go to the next slide. So moving forward and just looking back a little bit with 2021, as I mentioned before, the public nuisance bylaw was passed. The main complaints that we received were light trespass and obnoxious odor related. I've already spoken to the obnoxious odor that related a lot of times with cannabis operations. Light trespass, we have seen quite a few, and it's with businesses that were closely related to residential areas. And we've been working with the business owners or the property owners to try and work to the best arrangements as possible and make sure that the residents are satisfied and can live their lives happily and peacefully. Snow clearing and street clearing provisions were passed in November of 2021. And with that came a priority to educate and inform the residents of the town of Lincoln of the snow clearing, especially the snow clearing provision, as we were going to go into an enforcement mode with that as it was passed. We did take a very educational approach as was requested, and that was received for the most part very well by the members of the community. We had created a tracking system for the warnings and issued offense notices for all the different snow events, and this was the year to have it because we had 5, I believe, snow events through this winter. And we were able to track when vehicles were issued a warning, and then if they were coming back, if they needed to be issued a notice after that fact. And it helped quell a lot of questions or concerns in regards to whether people were actually issued a warning or they knew about it or not. And hopefully we'll move into another educational period in the fall of 2022 and be well prepared for 2023's winter season. I've already spoken to COVID-19, but with the Emergency Measures and Civil Protection Act and the ROA expiring at the end of April, we do anticipate that there'll be more and more people that are wanting to take advantage of better weather and wanting to get out of their houses and be in the public and take advantage of attending local businesses, attending parks, being in public spaces. So we anticipate an increase in parks related enforcement as well through the spring and summer. We're already working with community members as we see an increase in the requests for special events and noise exemption permits. So we do anticipate that will continue, and there'll be many public events and private functions that will be happening and getting people back out into a more normal period of living. At this point in time, I just want to appreciate the opportunity to speak and speak so proudly of my office and the work that my officers do. And again, I acknowledge their dedication and their professionalism they displayed throughout this period of time. We take the approach, I brought with me something from my previous career, and we took the approach of engagement, communication, education, and then if necessary, enforcement. But we're trying to gain compliance through engagement, education, and speaking with people before there's enforcement. And I think that's the right way to do it. So with that, I thank you, and I turn it back over for any questions.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for your presentation. And do members of council have any questions? Councilor McPherson, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Mike. Mike, first of all, thank you for your report and for the presentation. You know, we only get really one chance each year to have you come in front of council, and you know, I would certainly be remiss if I didn't, thank you and your entire team for the work that you do every day to really, make our residents feel a high level of comfort that, you know, things are running smoothly and that we, take care of violations and potential violations quickly, and we deal with them, as you say, in a form that is engage, educate, and then enforce. So we don't get enough chance to recognize you and your team. I think personally, anytime that I have had a resident contact me and I've turned them over to you, that's really the last time I hear about it. So I know that they're not always that easy, and that you've got to work through some challenges, with things as you've listed tonight. So, when I think about, the 1,100 calls that you've got, and I think about, our growing community, which is probably driving some of that, and as we continue to grow, I'm sure that we're going to have more and more of those types of calls. But I think about, where we were a number of years ago and where we are today, and just seeing those vehicles driving around town, I think, again, really gives our residents a feeling of confidence that we're out there. We're in the community. We're taking care of things. So, just wanted to acknowledge you and your entire team, and I please send that on to them. That it is very much appreciated. I do have a question, and I'm glad to see in your report an update on, particularly on the cannabis situation that you've dealt with in 2021, and obviously very, very pleased with the results that you've written in the report of how those situations were dealt with. So again, I guess a little bit of a congratulations to you and your team working with the Niagara Regional Police Force in what could be, I'm sure you are aware from your past employment, a potentially tricky situation. So good to hear that. My question is with regards to in the report, there's reference made to the addition of business licensing frameworks for the short-term rental accommodation and cannabis cultivation. And maybe not through to you, Mike, but maybe through to the staff. I don't know if this would be Mr. Bruder or Mr. Deanne, as far as the business licensing and maybe where we're at with that as kind of the last piece of our plan to deal particularly with the cannabis cultivation side of things.
Wonder if I can get comment on where we're at with that through you, Mr. Chair.
Who would like to tackle that? Mr. Bruder, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, good question, Councillor McPherson. You know, you'll recall when we were going through all of the development of our land use provisions and then looking at our nuisance bylaw that we put in place, you're right, there was always that three-pronged approach, the other being business licensing. And as we started working at that, you know, we also started to hear a little bit both, you know, from council and then from some few instances of concerned residents too about some short-term accommodations and potentially the need to incorporate those businesses as well into a licensing system. So what we did was we struck kind of a interdisciplinary team consisting of, you know, our municipal law enforcement team, our planning team that deals with some of these things, and then our economic development team as well. And you know, I'll let Director Deanne follow up with any comments he might have. But we're at the point now where we've done a lot of consultation with other municipalities to see how they tackle things on both fronts. We've nailed down kind of an initial preliminary approach we would take to record keeping, you know, realizing that an ultimate solution would probably include some significant software implications, just because, you know, the idea is we start with, you know, these two streams and then we move forward and expand a little bit in terms of how we implement business licensing. So there is going to be a little bit more information coming forward next week. We have an update kind of on our short-term accommodations piece, not forgetting too that the cannabis cultivation will also be included in those considerations as well. So I don't know, maybe I'll ask Director Deanne if he's got any follow-up comments.
Thank you, Director Bruder, and through you, Chair, to the councillor. So, I mean, Matt pretty much laid out the process that we're undertaking, councillor, and economic development is very supportive of what we've laid out. The multidisciplinary team is working well together. You know, very supportive of short-term accommodations, the licensing and regulating of them. It allows us to get a better sense of what we have in our community when it comes to short-term accommodations, but also down the road, if we so choose, implement a municipal accommodation tax to better support and market our community. So I think Director Bruder sort of laid out, you know, the process that we're undertaking, but it's a great collaborative approach that we've put together. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. And again, thank you, Mike, for the report and for what you and your team are doing. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rinjima, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation, Mike. I want to start with a comment. Say, you talked about how your department handled COVID, and I want to say that I'm really proud of how this municipality handled the issues related to the incredible COVID-related confusion and stress that everybody's been through for the last couple of years. I do like talking to people about how this municipality put reasonable behavior and mitigation and education first. So very good on all of you involved from the top down. Thank you. I have a couple of questions. I had someone reaching out to me during the winter saying that there was one particular fellow on his street that would park incorrectly on the wrong side of the road where they shouldn't be parking during, and it was particularly troublesome to him because it was during the winter, but it was, from his perspective, always on a Sunday. And he felt that this person is very aware that we didn't have bylaw enforcing parking issues on Sunday. And I did speak to you about that. So I'm wondering if we are moving towards having somebody enforcing parking regulations on Sundays.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Chair. Yes, we've received a small amount of complaints in regards to issues related to parking on Sundays. As such, what I have done is, at this point, we've initiated a program where there is a revolving Sunday through the month where an officer will cover off that shift or cover off and take some hours on the Sunday to do some enforcement. And we're looking at that as a project at this point in time, and just to see how much enforcement or how much interaction is actually taking place, if there is actually a true need for it, or at this point in time or not. I'm not saying that we don't have municipal law enforcement on Sundays, but I'm not saying that we do every Sunday either. But at this point in time, we are doing one on a revolving basis to cover off a Sunday to just determine what the need is out there for it. And if it is determined that we do need it, then the schedule would be changed accordingly to cover off that full weekend coverage.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. And another question, Mr. Chair? I had someone, so it's a rhetorical question, I guess. Let's say a winery wanted to have music during a wedding on a Saturday. Are there hours during the day when it's okay to have amplified music?
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Thank you for the question, Councillor. So you're referring to what would be covered under the noise control bylaw.
Yeah.
And although there are times specified for noise, there is also a general provision within the noise control bylaw in regards to the disturbing of the inhabitants within the town. And then it lists what would be included in noise that would be disturbing to the inhabitants of the town. And some of that is amplified music or amplified sound. That being said, people do have music, iPods, phones, radios, stereos, and for a person to enjoy their music outside to themselves or on their property is one thing. If it's escaping onto other properties, we try to go by and make a determination on whether or not that sound is audible from the point of reception. So where the person is that's complaining from. If you can just hear the dull thud of some bass or a light part of music, then I wouldn't deem that necessary for any sort of enforcement or follow up with the property owner. But if it is something where you can make out lyrics or whatever, we would speak to the property owner and let them know that the music should be turned down somewhat to not disturb the other inhabitants of the town. Generally, when there's an event going on, people contact the town and go through the noise exemption application process for a noise exemption permit. And those aren't based on any sort of number. It's just basically what it is that's taking place. And we did have one most recently where it was a resident within the municipality that was wishing to have some live music on a weekend through the day. And after discussion with them, it was deemed it was appropriate to get a noise exemption permit for that. With the live music being outside and they are surrounded by other residences, there's a large opportunity to have that disturb the inhabitants around them. And within the urban boundary, it's 60 meters has to be notified of that. So all properties within a 60-meter radius would be notified well in advance by way of letter notification that they've applied for an noise exemption permit, and let all the residents around there be aware of it. And if any of them have any sort of concerns or questions, they can voice it to the town prior to the event taking place. And there are other stipulations that go with that as well. But in cases like that, it's 500 meters when it's outside the urban boundary and 60 meters within the urban boundary. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, it did. Because the answer is I guess the question is, when is it advisable to get a noise exemption permit? And you kind of answer that. It's a little bit of a case-by-case basis, whether you're inside the urban boundary, outside the urban boundary, how loud your music is. And to a certain extent, the enforcement of that noise bylaw is complaint-based, and you take it on a case-by-case basis. Okay, so it was a particular person at a winery who had asked me, what do I do? So now I kind of have the answer for them. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Michalak, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair Brunet. Through you to Mike. Thank you for coming tonight and your report and everything you do throughout the year. Question I have is with regards to the 1,171 calls. And I'm curious, do we break that down in terms of how many of those calls are repeat calls for the same complaint? Are they 1,171 individual calls, or could somebody be calling 5 or 10 times regarding the same complaint? Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for the question. It's a good question. There would be repeat complaints within that number. The reason being, one person can call in several times over a period of time to make different complaints, or they can be calling back advising that it's happening again, or they could be calling about the same property, but it could be a different complaint. So we do get those are regular, and it does happen, but we have to look at each complaint that's received and go look to the validity of the complaint. We can't make a determination just because it may be a person that's called in before that there's no substance to it. We will look at it, investigate it to some degree, and make a determination based on that. So, appreciate that answer. It's just what concerns me, and I think that the educational method of enforcement is terrific, voluntary compliance, but I'm just want to make sure that we are actually issuing tickets, or we are actually, there is a point where, education is not getting through, and that we're actually coming down hard, because I think it shakes everybody else up in the neighborhoods that you're dealing with. And that's just, I'm not an expert in this. That's just my thoughts on that. So I just, as far as that goes. And through you, Chair, another question I have is with regards to the zoning. You had only one concern or one investigation with regards to that. Do we take a proactive, are we a complaints driven zoning enforcement, or do we proactively search out or notice things that are not in compliance and try to rectify that? Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for that question. And just to speak to the first one you had in regards to education or enforcement, we do both. And there are times when there are charges laid, there are times when there's orders laid, there are times when there's notices given. So it's not just strictly speaking with people. We do go to the extent of enforcement throughout the year, and we have. In regards to your second point, proactive or reactive, we do both for zoning. The majority of our stuff is reactive in regards to zoning. It is mainly complaint driven in regards to zoning. The reason being, we need to have authority to enter onto a property to conduct an investigation, to conduct an inspection. So if we don't receive a legitimate complaint in regards to said property, the officer's possible observations at the time don't always necessitate an inspection. Under the Municipal Act, we have to have reasonable grounds to enter onto the property because they're conducting an inspection or an investigation. So we like to ensure that our officers have all the lawful authority to enter on the property. So it is generally a complaint-driven situation. Thank you very much for that answer. It's just with regards to, with regards to zoning and use of use of, allowable uses within a zoning, and if there's clear or visible infractions that are occurring, that we are proactively working on that before things get out of control and even more difficult to enforce should we not be proactive. So that's where I was going. Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you, Councillor. Mayor Easton, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Barkway, for this report. It's very revealing, and I certainly do appreciate all the effort and creativity that's gone into managing all the issues we've had over the last couple of years. There's three areas that that I think are of particular interest to me. One of them has to do with property standards, because there are still some areas in the town where progress just doesn't seem to be able to be made. Secondly, the issues around cannabis. I still think you need a dog from time to time. Then there wouldn't be any question of where the cannabis odors were coming from. However, in both of those significant cases that you were talking about, I don't think that we can underestimate the pain that the neighbors felt for not months, not weeks, not months, but years, waiting to solve that issue for other agencies. And, I don't know what to say about that. I mean, it's always wonderful to get a big bus. There's no question about that. But that was, I really do want to acknowledge the difficulty that was for that neighborhood. And I don't know that there's anything you can do about that. However, I do want to know whether or not you believe at this point that in terms of cannabis odors, where I believe that we've already defined as a council that we expect the highest standard of technology to be used. Maybe they do it for a while, maybe they do it when they first open, but it's amazing how things deteriorate. So what can we do about that? Do you need more information from us? Do we need to make an adjustment to that bylaw? Because I'm not thinking that there should be a whole lot of flexibility here. The highest standard, which is no odor at all, achieved by using the best technology that's available, is what we asked for, I believe, when that bylaw was being developed. So I'm just going to, I don't know whether you have any response, but there may be an opportunity. I would ask you to come back and provide us with more information on how we might approach this in the future. The problems aren't going away, and they're not appreciated. And I noticed, that the Canada Health facility that's on the South Service Road, I noticed that there are fences down. And if that's an electric fence, it's another property standards matter along with everything else there. So I'm going to leave that one with you. What I really want to talk about is site alteration, because I don't believe that we have maybe made it clear enough what we want to happen here. There are several areas in the town. There's the one where we actually went to the Supreme Court. I'm waiting, to hear information on how that property is going to be restored. I have complaints that have been passed on where people believe that there are toxic materials that are being hidden on agricultural sites. And so this is one where I would very much appreciate some perspective on your part, including, because we've talked about this at both the Ag Committee, Policy Committee of the region, and at some of the regional meetings, whether or not this needs to be covered off through a regional approach. Is it that big? Is it that complicated? And I would say almost every municipality is suffering from issues in this area.
Thank you, through your chair. Thank you, Mayor. To your points, I agree. Site alteration is an issue, and it's not just within the town of Lincoln. It's everywhere. I would be more than open to having discussions in regards to making it something that's done regionally instead of just within the municipality. I know now currently with some of the issues that we had over the last year, we worked extensively with the MOE and NPCA. The Niagara Regional Police were involved. And as I expressed, we ended up having to go to court to get the injunctions as well. They're not easy situations to deal with. They're not easy investigations, and it's multi-layered. There's not one answer that would govern every situation. So I think it is something that is bigger than just an individual municipality, but it's something that would have to be looked at with a larger scope. I think with more parties involved, more agencies involved to really do something that would be.
So what do you think would be what's a practical answer that you can give us in this short time, just to let us know about how you could approach this and then come back and to get council support?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Mayor, I would definitely bring this up at my next meeting with all the other municipal managers within the region. Anyways, we have a very good working group now, and bringing something forward like that, at least I'm speaking right to the other managers, other bylaw managers about the issue, and bring it up there and see what the discussion puts forward. We also have a regional representative on that group as well, so we get input from the region as well in regards to what they see and how they could be involved. At least I'd be able to provide you some more answers at my next attendance.
Okay, that would be great. And so would you also consider, through you, Mr. Chair, would you consider, Mike, the issues around cannabis odors and any possible changes that need to be made to the bylaw to bring more teeth to it, or anything else in your judgment and expertise council should be considering?
Through you, Chair. Thank you. Yes, my apologies for not touching on that before. Cannabis odor, there is another venue for us that we can look at. I've had some initial talks with a couple of other municipalities that have this in place, but there's a cannabis licensing bylaw that's in place in some municipalities, which then defers to zoning and building as well and brings it all together. That may be another option. It's something to discuss, and I can put forward a report in regards to that, to what the benefits of that would be as well, if it's something that we would look at within the town. I do know that for one, I know for sure Wayne Fleet is quite successful with having that in place as well. I think within the public nuisance bylaw, it gives us something. It was more than what the town here had before to deal with it. But I can say to the odor issue itself, I did have the opportunity to tour a federally licensed facility today, actually, and walk through the majority of that building with very little to no odor. And there was only in one of two rooms that there was any odor at all. So the odor mitigation that's in place can do an awful lot. It is true, it's up to the facility to do it. Health Canada is involved with, as I said, with the other facility that we're dealing with right now. And hopefully we can get some sort of resolution with that one where it's there's an improvement that's drastically noticed by the residents. It's actually, we're receiving complaints from Grisby residents in regards to the property. So.
That's great. Thanks very much, Mike. You've taken a very fulsome approach to this, Mr. Chairman. I think we have a good team. These are not easy issues, and I look forward to being able to move forward with some other improvements. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm not seeing any other hands. I'm wondering, Councillor Michalak, if you could take the chair so I could ask a couple of comments, a couple of questions and a couple of comments, please.
Floor is yours.
Thank you. Mike, I've reflected over the last year and a half why Councillor Pachariba and I seem like we're always on the email to you. And I thank you for this report, because when I count 879 out of 1,171 in Beamsville, and a lot of those in the area where we've got development surrounding snow and parking, I don't feel as bad, but I certainly hope that this number drops for all of our sake. But I do appreciate your efforts, your team's efforts, and especially around, the snow and everything that's happened with the snow enforcement. I do get all kinds of comments from residents that they do appreciate the engagement, the education, and if enforcement follows, it's not the fault of bylaw. It's someone not listening. So I do appreciate that three-pronged approach. And the other thing I want to comment, I was involved in that one zoning, and unfortunately, I want to give you kudos and your team. That is something, unfortunately, that for whatever reason, long before me, on the last 8 years, that situation was around for decades. It's documented going back, from what I understand, to the early 90s. So I appreciate the fact that this took a lot of time, but we did the right thing. And I appreciate all the efforts of your team to bring that to court and get a ruling and do the right thing. So for that, I thank you. I just want to ask a couple of questions through you, Chair Michalak, just to piggyback on Councillor Rinjama's comment. So just the other day, as we come out of COVID, I had a resident ask me, with COVID, we haven't had a lot of special events. We haven't had weddings. So similarly to the question that Councillor Rinjama asked about around the Sunday issue with parking, residents do have a concern that when they get a call on a special event, let's say a wedding that's involved noise amplification, that if they call bylaw at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, or even if a wedding's on a Friday night, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, when a reception after a wedding, what kind of response are they going to get from bylaw? I'm wondering if you could just respond to that specific scenario.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor, for the question. It's a good question. When we know that events are taking place, my officers are willing to augment their shifts to cover off the hours for the event so that we have availability to respond if there's a complaint in regards to that specific event or other issues that come up. The opportunity is also there because it's if there's a complaint after hours, if it was 11:30 or 12 and it wasn't an event that had a noise exemption permit, but there was a noise complaint, the opportunity and the option is there for people to actually contact the Niagara Regional Police as well. They do respond to noise complaints, noisy party, noisy stereo, after hours, and they do respond on a priority basis, and they would attend residences or properties in regards to that. They would be responding on the authority of the complaint that's received. So if it's a noise complaint, that's what they would be attending on. So there is it's two-pronged. We would be there and be able to respond if we're aware of the event taking place. If it's an event that has a noise exemption permit, I would have an officer working through that time until the end of the permit so that we know that it would cover off if there is a concern or a complaint issued. If it's not something that's done by a permit, then if it's after hours and my officers aren't working, then residents are fully able to contact the local police service and get response from them as well.
That's great. Thank you for that response. Through you, Chair, I just have one additional question. And I only ask this question because I don't know the answer. So, it's been exacerbated with COVID, but our chief building inspector, Mr. Greenaway, has been working on the sign clutter of mobile signs, throughout Lincoln, especially on Ontario Street, but through businesses and, all through Lincoln. And he's done a marvelous job, and it's not gone unnoticed. Just recently, there was some residents that took to social media saying, wow, really kudos to everyone. Ontario Street is looking much better. And it is. But I'm wondering, through you, Chair, to Mr. Barkway, from your perspective as the manager of bylaw enforcement, if over time we start to see a number of signs for whatever reason start to pop up again, is this a situation where you and your bylaw team have been involved already, or do you see a possible involvement moving forward if that scenario were to occur? And I only ask the question because I don't know. You might have been involved with Mr. Greenaway already in some of this, so I'm not trying to sell your team short, but I'm just asking the question. We've worked really hard to get where we are. I'd hate to see anything digress and go backwards, and all of a sudden, as we move out of COVID, businesses start to, do whatever they want to do. And how do we deal with that from your perspective as bylaw?
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Good question. We have worked with Mr. Greenway in the past. He has taken an awful lot of this on himself and has shouldered a lot of that, and he's done a fantastic job. Yes, much like we work collaboratively with some of the other departments, engineering, planning, there may be times where they have the specific knowledge or the background and the education to make certain determinations, but the actual enforcement comes through our office. But we'd work collaboratively with the other people, the staff from the other departments, towards getting that and getting all the information, and whether it's us that ends up doing the enforcement, or whether we help them in gathering evidence or information along the way through the investigation. For sure, we have been, and we can be involved.
That's great. Thank you, Councillor Mikulek. I appreciate the opportunity to ask those questions.
You're welcome. The chair is yours.
So again, Mr. Barkway, on behalf of all of council, I think Councillor McPherson, mentioned it quite appropriately. We only get really one chance to get this review. It is quite interesting to see the amount of calls and how this has escalated over the last couple of years. I hope it settles down for your teams, but I'm sure that if it doesn't, you'll be there to meet all the challenges. So thank you very much. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Mikulek. The council receive for information report PD 18-22 regarding the municipal law enforcement year-end review. And I will now ask our deputy clerk to call out the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Rajima?
Yes.
Mayor Easton?
Support.
Councillor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Mikulek?
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
And Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. That carries.
Thank you, Deputy Clerk. We will now consider item 7.2.3, Report LS 06-22, regarding the addition to the Town of Lincoln's Heritage Inventory Register, Bennett Hall. Do members of council have any questions? Councillor Timmers, what took you so long? I was waiting for you.
I've been waiting all night for this. No, I honestly, I don't have any questions regarding this, but I do have a couple of comments, and I think this is a great report, and I want to thank Deputy Clerk for putting this together. And I hope everyone read J.D. Bennett's autobiography here, because it's very, very interesting. And this building, I've been wanting to get this building on the registry. I think this is the second term, and it's finally here. And I think it's very culturally and historically significant in our downtown core. So I'm very pleased to see this coming forward tonight, and hopefully down the road, I'd also would hope that the Heritage Committee will eventually designate this building. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Timmers. I'm not seeing any other hands, but I certainly appreciate Councillor Timmers. She has been pushing this stone up the hill for a long time, so I do appreciate her tenacity. Thank you. There being no further discussion, I have a motion moved by Councillor Timmers. The council receive report LS-06-22 regarding the addition to the Town of Lincoln's Heritage Inventory Register, Bennett Hall. And that council acknowledge the cultural and heritage value of Bennett Hall, 4285 Mountain Street, in accordance with section 27.3 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And that council approve the addition of Bennett Hall, 4285 Mountain Street, to the Town of Lincoln's Heritage Inventory Register. And I will now ask our deputy clerk to call it the vote.
Thank you. Councillor Miklick?
Yes.
Councillor Reimer?
Yes.
Councillor Timmers?
Yes.
Mayor Easton?
Support.
Councillor McPherson?
Yes.
Councillor Rajima?
Yes.
Councillor Pachariva?
Yes.
Councillor Russell?
Yes.
Chair?
Yes.
Thank you. That carries.
Thank you. There being no additional reports to consider for the Planning and Economic Development Committee agenda, we have now concluded the Planning and Economic Development agenda. We will now rotate and allow Councillor and Chair Adam Russell to assume the chair at this time for the General Business and Finance Committee agenda. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and for all those GBNF fans who are clamoring at home, waiting for our agenda to start, I'm going to ask that you hold on for 5 more minutes so we can have a quick bio break and we reconvene at 9:02. Thank you very much.